Story 1. She descended at 217, the night manager of Trieste. The Grand Albergo San Corrado was built in 1892, when Trieste still belonged to an empire that no longer exists. The marble floors remember that. They hold the cold differently after midnight, like stone that has learned to keep secrets. I became the night manager because I prefer silence. That's what I told the director when he hired me. I didn't tell him I preferred ours. When the world feels suspended, when time loosens its grip. The shift runs from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. After 1 a.m., the lobby empties. The chandeliers dim automatically. The building exhales. That's when I first noticed the woman on the staircase. She appeared just after 2 in the morning. I was behind the front desk reconciling invoices when I sensed movement in the periphery of the security monitor. A pale figure standing halfway up the central staircase. I looked up. No one was there. The staircase curved elegantly beneath a frescoed ceiling, cherubs, faded clouds, gold leaf darkened by time. The brass banister reflected only chandelier light. I checked the camera again. Empty. The Grand Albergo has the kind of staircase meant for entrances. Brides descend it. Politicians wave from it. Opera singers once stayed here during the Austro-Hungarian period. It is impossible to stand halfway down those steps unnoticed. Yet at 2:17 a.m., the camera showed a woman in a long, dark dress, not moving, facing the lobby. I replayed the footage 3 times. She wasn't transparent. She wasn't distorted. She simply stood there, dark hair pinned high, shoulders squared, one hand resting on the banister. When I froze the frame, the image glitched, horizontal lines tearing across her face. The timestamp flickered from 2:17 to 2:03 and back again. I told myself it was interference. The Bora wind had been strong that evening, rattling shutters and humming down the chimney flues. Old wiring, old stone, old city. Trieste at night is a study in echoes. Even the sea seems to breathe differently along the Adriatic. By 3 a.m., I had convinced myself I'd imagined her. At 3:12 a.m., the lobby temperature dropped. The thermostat read 21 degrees Celsius. My breath fogged faintly. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle shift, like stepping into a cellar. The chandeliers flickered once, then steadied. I heard the sound of fabric moving across marble, not footsteps, not heels. A slow, deliberate glide. I stepped from behind the desk. Buona sera. My voice sounded smaller than usual. The lobby was empty, but the air felt occupied. The scent came next. Violet perfume, powdery, old-fashioned, not the citrus-clean aroma our housekeeping staff uses. It hung in the air near the staircase. I climbed 3 steps. The temperature dropped another degree. Halfway up, I felt watched, not from above, from below. I turned. The lobby lights dimmed slightly as they do during energy cycles, but the shadows seemed deeper than usual. On the security monitor behind the desk, I could see myself standing on the stairs, and behind me a second figure. I descended too quickly, nearly slipping. The lobby was empty. The monitor showed only me, breathing too fast. I rewound the footage. There she was, standing 1 step below where I had been, close enough to touch. The next night, I arrived early, told no one. At 1:58 a.m., the chandeliers dimmed automatically. At 2:03 a.m., the temperature fell. At 2:17 a.m., she appeared. This time not on the monitor, on the staircase. She stood beneath the fresco. Solid, still. Her dress was black silk, high collar, sleeves to the wrist. Not modern fashion, something late 19th century. Her face was pale, but distinct. Eyes dark, expression neutral. She was looking directly at me. I couldn't move. Not from fear, from certainty. She belonged there, as though I had interrupted something rehearsed for over a century. "Signora?" I asked softly. She tilted her head. The chandeliers flickered. The sound of the Bora wind intensified outside, striking the tall lobby windows with a hollow thud. But the glass didn't move. The only movement was her hand tightening on the banister. The brass darkened beneath her fingers, not tarnished, burned. When I blinked, she was gone. The temperature remained low. And on the marble where she had stood, a faint crescent scuff, as if fabric had brushed repeatedly over the same place for years. I began researching the hotel's archives. The Grand Albergo San Corrado once hosted aristocracy, naval officers, foreign diplomats. In 1899, a woman named Contessa Amelia Varesi checked in. She never checked out. Her husband claimed she vanished during the night. No body was found. The staff were dismissed quietly. The incident was recorded as a scandal. Her portrait existed in the municipal archive. Dark hair, high collar, severe expression, identical. The third night, she descended one step, just one. At 2:17 a.m., the air grew sharp enough to sting my lungs. The violet perfume was stronger now, less floral, more metallic. "Why are you here?" I asked. The question felt foolish as soon as I spoke it. Her lips parted slightly. No sound emerged. But the chandeliers dimmed further, plunging the lobby into a muted amber glow. The shadows pooled unnaturally at the base of the staircase. On the security monitor, something was wrong. She was not facing me. On camera, she faced upward, as though someone stood above her, watching. I looked up instinctively. The staircase curved into darkness. The top landing was empty, yet I felt a presence there, not hers. Something patient. She descended another step. The marble beneath her feet frosted over, delicate crystalline patterns forming and dissolving. My hands trembled. The hotel felt divided, warm near the entrance, glacial near the stairs. A boundary. The next morning, housekeeping reported faint scorch marks on the banister, exactly where her hand had rested. No electrical faults were found. The metal had blistered inward, as if gripped too tightly. By the sixth night, she stood only 3 steps above the lobby floor. Each appearance lasted longer. Each descent brought colder air. And always at 2:17. That night, she finally spoke. Not audibly, but I understood. Her mouth formed one word. Stay. Behind her. At the top of the staircase, the darkness thickened. It did not resemble a person. It resembled absence. As though light itself avoided that section of air. On the monitor, it pulsed faintly, like breathing. I realized then she was not approaching me. She was retreating from it. Each step downward was not advancement. It was escape. At 2:17 a.m., on the 8th night, she reached the final step. The temperature dropped to 12 degrees Celsius. The chandeliers flickered violently. The violet scent became suffocating. She stepped onto the marble floor, and for the first time, the shadow at the top of the stairs moved. It flowed downward, not walking, not gliding, simply occupying each step in sequence. The security monitor filled with static. The lobby lights went out. In total darkness, I felt her pass beside me. The cold was unbearable, and then warmth. When the lights returned, I stood alone behind the desk. The staircase was empty, the air normal, the banister restored. There are no scorch marks now, no frost, no camera glitches. But every night at 2:17 a.m., the lobby temperature drops by exactly 1 degree. It's just one. And sometimes when I look at the monitor, I see the top of the staircase darken first, as if something is descending. It's waiting for her to reach the bottom again. And I had begun to wonder if she was asking me to stay, or warning me not to. Story 2. The housekeeper who heard the walls move, Trieste, Italy. I've cleaned the Grand Albergo San Corrado for 11 years. Long enough to know which floors creak in summer, which doors swell in winter, and which guests pretend not to leave stains. People think housekeepers see nothing. In truth, we see everything, especially what doesn't belong. My shift begins at 6 a.m. before breakfast service. The lobby is pale and gray at that hour, light seeping in from the Adriatic like watered milk. The marble still holds the night's cold. Some mornings it feels colder than it should, like something walked it barefoot. The first time it happened, I was assigned to the 4th floor, older rooms, high ceilings, long corridor with oil portraits along the walls. Room 412 had been vacant for 3 days. The bed was made, the windows locked, yet the wardrobe doors stood open. It wasn't unusual. Maintenance forgets things. Guests wander in by mistake, but the hangers were swinging. Not violently, just gently. As if someone had brushed past seconds earlier. I checked the bathroom, dry, unused. The mirror slightly fogged. There was no steam in the air. When I stepped back into the bedroom, the wardrobe doors were closed. I froze. I hadn't heard them move. The room was silent. The silence felt deliberate. The fourth floor has a different atmosphere from the others. The ceilings are higher, the corridor narrower. Sound travels oddly. When a door closes at one end, it echoes twice. But that morning, I heard something new. A soft thud from inside the wall. It came again. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Not plumbing. Not pipes expanding. Sounded controlled. Measured. I pressed my ear against the wallpaper. The wall was cold. Colder than the corridor. The tapping shifted upward. Inside the wall cavity moving toward the ceiling. Following something. Or someone. That week, objects began shifting. Not dramatically. A lamp slightly turned. Curtains drawn halfway when I was certain I'd opened them fully. Pillows arranged differently after I fluffed them. Tiny corrections, as if someone disagreed with my work. I told myself it was memory error. Repetition blurs details. But in room 417, I folded a towel into a swan, something I rarely do, and placed it precisely in the center of the bed. When I returned 10 minutes later with fresh water glasses, the towel lay flattened, not fallen, pressed. The Bora wind was strong that afternoon, rattled the tall windows along the corridor, making the frames tremble in their casings. Yet inside the rooms, the air felt still, heavy, like a held breath. The first violent movement happened in room 409, an empty room. I was vacuuming when the bathroom door slammed shut behind me, hard enough to shake the mirror. I turned the handle, locked. There was no one inside. I unlocked it with my master key. The sink tap was running, full pressure. Water overflowing into the basin. I know the sound of plumbing failures. This wasn't that. The tap had been turned fully clockwise, deliberately. From that day forward, the tapping inside the walls became constant. Not loud, but persistent. Sometimes it traveled horizontally down the corridor, moving room to room, like something pacing. I began timing it. The activity peaked at 1 p.m. exactly. When most guests were at lunch, when the fourth floor was quietest, one afternoon, as the clock in the hallway chimed 1, every portrait frame along the corridor shifted at once. Not falling, just tilting, all at the same angle. Toward room 412, I stood alone in the hallway. The temperature dropped. The air pressure changed subtly, like before a thunderstorm. The tapping stopped. Complete silence. Room 412's door creaked open by itself. Slowly. No wind. No draft. The corridor windows were closed tight against the Bora. Inside, the curtains fluttered violently despite sealed glass. The bedspread rippled. The wardrobe doors banged against their hinges. Open, closed, open, closed. Not random. Rhythmic. The bathroom mirror cracked from corner to center. A single sharp line, as if struck from behind. I shouted for help. No one answered. The fourth floor absorbed sound in strange ways. The wardrobe doors suddenly stopped. Both stood open. Inside, the hangers swung wildly, as if shoved. Then everything froze. The curtains dropped limp, the air stilled. The temperature normalized. Only the cracked mirror remained as evidence. Management blamed structural settling. Old hotel, old beams. But I've worked here long enough to know the building's moods. This was not settling. It was agitation. The next day, every object I touched fell. Not thrown, but knocked. A glass sliding off a nightstand after I set it down. A stack of towels tipping over, vase shifting an inch toward the edge before dropping. Each incident happened when I turned my back. I began speaking aloud while I worked. I'm only cleaning, I'll leave soon. The tapping slowed when I spoke. It intensified when I stayed silent. One afternoon at exactly 1 p.m., the entire fourth floor corridor doors slammed shut simultaneously. The impact shook dust from the ceiling. A chandelier swayed overhead. From inside the walls came a furious pounding, like fists. The sound moved toward me, through plaster, through beams, closing in till it stopped directly behind the wallpaper at my back. The wall bulged outward slightly, not breaking, but just pressing. As if something inside leaned its full weight against it. Then quiet. The wall flattened. The corridor temperature rose. Every portrait frame returned to perfect alignment. Since that day, I refuse to clean the fourth floor alone. Management thinks I'm exaggerating, but sometimes when I vacuum near room 412, I feel resistance in the hose, as though something unseen is pulling the air back into the wall. And at exactly 1:00 p.m., the corridor always grows still, waiting, like the building is deciding whether to move again. Story 3. The guest who couldn't check out Trieste, Italy. I arrived at the Grand Albergo San Corrado on a gray morning, the Adriatic wind tugging my scarf like it wanted to peel me away from the city. My reason for visiting was simple: a business conference on maritime logistics. The hotel's historic reputation made it sound prestigious, and I admit, I was drawn to its faded grandeur. I didn't expect to feel watched the moment I stepped inside. The lobby was quiet. Beyond the marble, chandeliers glittered dimly, dust faintly clinging to the brass fixtures. The receptionist gave me a polite nod, her eyes moving too quickly elsewhere. I signed in, collected my key, and took the elevator to the 7th floor. I would later learn this floor was rarely occupied. The corridor smelled faintly of polish and old wood, mingling with something else. A cold, metallic scent that made my stomach tense. My suitcase wheels clicked sharply against the worn carpet. Each click echoed down the hall, though the hallway was deserted. Or so I thought. Room 77 was at the far end. The door was slightly ajar when I arrived. I pushed it gently. Inside, the air was still, yet heavy. The curtains moved faintly, though the window was closed. The radiator hissed once, though I hadn't turned it on. A shiver ran through me. I unpacked quickly, my laptop, papers, and a change of clothes. The room was modern enough to have conveniences: small desk, minibar, TV. Yet there was a sense of antiquity: 2 ceiling moldings, brass fixtures, and dark wood furniture that seemed almost too large for the space. I told myself I was imagining the unease. That night I returned late from dinner. The hallway smelled faintly different, musky, like wet stone. I noticed shadows along the walls moving without cause. One stretched along the corridor floor, long and low, as if something crouched just out of sight. When I paused, the shadow froze. I checked the keycard, unsure why my heartbeat had sped. Room 77 responded as usual. I entered and shut the door. The faint metallic smell lingered. The radiator hissed again. Not random, I realized. Every hiss followed a small click, the sound of the minibar door opening, but I hadn't touched it. Sleep was uneasy. I awoke to the sound of scratching soft behind the headboard. I froze. The sound repeated, rhythmic, almost deliberate. I told myself it was mice. Old buildings have them. But the scratching moved upward, toward the ceiling, traveling along the wall panels. Morning brought no relief. I went for coffee in the dining room. The hotel was quiet but not empty. I passed staff who avoided eye contact. Guests were scarce. I joked to myself that I had picked an odd week to stay here, yet something followed me back to my room. At 2 p.m., I returned to find the desk chair facing the door. I'd left it pushed under the desk. I moved it back. 15 minutes later, it had shifted again, angled toward the door. No one entered. The hallway was silent. I stared. The movement was too precise to be wind or accident. I began noticing changes in the room. Small things. My suitcase slightly shifted. A water glass I hadn't touched now sat nearer the bed. My laptop was closed when I remembered leaving it open. Everything was being subtly manipulated. The first real manifestation occurred around 11 p.m. A shadow moved across the far wall, just beyond the reach of the bedside lamp. No form, no features, just a presence, dense and dark. I called out. Nothing responded. I tried reasoning. It's the mind, I muttered to myself. Isolation, stress, jet lag. But when I crossed the room, the shadow mimicked me. It didn't just move, it mirrored my steps perfectly, just beyond reach. And it wasn't my own shadow. My body blocked the lamp, yet the movement continued. The next day I left for the conference. For a few hours I thought I might be free, but when I returned, the room smelled like the metallic cold again. The chair was angled toward the door. The blinds, which I had closed fully, were now halfway open. I hadn't touched them. By the third night, I began leaving notes. I am here. Do not follow me. They vanished, or were torn. I found them in my suitcase, crumpled. When I tried to speak aloud to it, the scratches on the headboard grew louder, as if angered by acknowledgement. The air shifted strangely, one moment warm, the next icy. I began noticing a pressure like the room itself was inhaling and exhaling. The lamp flickered with each inhale. Shadows lengthened toward the far corner, always there, always waiting. One evening I thought I glimpsed a figure in the mirror reflection, quick, subtle, not human, not fully formed. I turned. Nothing. The reflection remained warped, dark. I couldn't see the room properly in it. Sleep became impossible. The scratches on the headboard turned into taps along the wall, moving rhythmically, sometimes running along the ceiling. I began sleeping on the couch, but the entity followed. The cushions compressed as if someone sat heavily. The blanket moved slightly, not enough to see, but enough to feel. By the fourth night I started speaking to it out loud. "Show me who you are." "What do you want?" the room answered. A soft creak, a metallic scent, a low vibration through the floorboards. I realized it was learning me, understanding me. The corridor outside my room shifted as I walked. I swear the walls elongated, narrowing the hallway, stretching it. Sometimes when I returned, the hallway seemed shorter, wider, impossible. Time itself became unreliable. I stopped touching things, stopped moving furniture, stopped opening drawers. Yet the entity still manipulated the room. The lamp's shade rotated slowly toward me. The curtains flinched. Even my reflection hesitated in the mirror. One night, I tried recording audio. The microphone picked up a low hum, vibrating through the frame of the building. I played it back. The sound was structured, almost deliberate, like a pulse. With the pulse, I could feel it moving closer. The scratching became tapping, the tapping became thumping. Walls groaned, floorboards moaned, and at one point I felt a hand brush my shoulder. I spun around, nothing. But my jacket sleeve was wet, not from sweat, from condensation, cold metallic moisture. I tried to leave. The elevator refused. The buttons lit, then darkened. The stairwell door wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Not by lock or key, but by awareness. The hotel had noticed me, and it didn't like me leaving. I slept in the armchair, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. The air grew heavier. The room's corners darkened, blurring slightly like paint bleeding into shadow. From the corner of my eye, movement flickered. No form, but weight. Presence. Patience. By the fifth night, I had begun to hallucinate, or at least I thought so. Footsteps outside, pacing. Whispered syllables I couldn't understand. Shadows coiling along the edges of the room. And still my reflection hesitated in the mirror, unwilling to fully appear. At exactly 2:23 a.m., the unknown entity manifested most strongly. I saw it across the room, faintly humanoid. No face, no features, just a dark silhouette. It mimicked me again, but this time, it moved independently, reaching toward the bed. I bolted upright. The bed felt compressed, as though someone had been leaning there while I slept. The room temperature dropped 20 degrees in a breath. My clothes clung to my skin. I realized it could manipulate not only objects, but the very air. I tried yelling, screaming, throwing things. The room responded. The bedspread rose like a wave. A chair slid violently across the floor. Lamps swung wildly. It was intelligent. It was learning. It was warning me. I didn't sleep that night. And when morning came, the elevator worked. The hallway returned to normal dimensions. The room smelled faintly of polish and wood. Yet I could still feel it in the edges of mirrors, in the coldness of the air near the curtains. Watching, waiting, I left the Grand Albergo San Corrado that day, but I can't leave completely. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see the hallway stretch infinitely, the door to room 77 glowing faintly, and a presence neither human nor entirely unseen, sliding silently beside me. I am a guest who never truly checked out. Story 4. The maintenance worker who heard the hallways whisper, Trieste, Italy. I've worked at the Grand Albergo San Corrado for nearly 15 years, mostly unseen. Pipes, boilers, wiring, the hidden guts of the building are my domain. Guests rarely notice me. Staff forget I exist until something breaks. That's exactly how I like it. Till one night I noticed something that couldn't be fixed. It began on a Tuesday. The Bora wind blew hard, rattling the windows along the east wing. I was checking radiators on the 4th floor. Water pressure was low. It's nothing unusual. But the corridor was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No guests, no housekeeping, not even the occasional scuttling mouse. As I tightened a valve in room 412, I heard it, a soft knock, metal on wood. I froze. The room was empty. No one could have entered unnoticed. The door had remained locked since I arrived. I told myself it was the pipes. Pressure equalizing. Building settled, but the sound repeated. 3 knocks. Then a pause. Then 5 quick taps. I stepped back. The radiator hissed, not from the valve I touched, but from somewhere else. Behind me, I turned slowly. Nothing. Just the shadows under the ornate moldings. They seemed longer tonight, stretching down the corridor, darkening as if they wanted to consume the light. I moved down the hall to check the next room, room 413. The door was ajar. I hadn't left it open. Inside, the chandelier swayed gently, though the air was still. A faint metallic scent filled the space. Cold, sharp, like wet iron. I started checking the wiring in the corridor. Every outlet, every switch. Nothing was loose, nothing malfunctioning. Yet the lights flickered intermittently, brief, almost imperceptible. Each flicker coincided with a movement in the corner of my vision. By midnight, the hotel felt alive in a way I hadn't experienced before. The marble floors echoed my footsteps differently, not louder, but uneven. My shoes clicked twice on some tiles, once on others, like someone else was pacing beside me. I reached the service stairs, dark, narrow, metal steps, curling between floors. I usually avoid them, unless necessary. Tonight I descended anyway. Soft, whispering sound followed me down. Not words I could understand, just a sibilant, indecipherable murmur, rising and falling with the stairwell lights. At the basement, the boiler hummed louder than normal. But that hum wasn't mechanical. It vibrated through the floorboards. My fingers on the pipes felt it. Pulse. Slow, deliberate. Something or someone was using the building's heart to communicate. Back upstairs, I noticed small anomalies. Tools shifted on my cart. Wrenches rolled half an inch from where I'd placed them. Screwdrivers twisted slightly. Nails rearranged themselves. Nothing dramatic, just subtle hints that I was not alone. I checked room 49. Guests had checked out yesterday. The bed was made. Nothing was out of place. Still, the door creaked when I touched it slowly, reluctantly, and a shadow darted across the ceiling. Not cast by me, not by any light, just moving. The scent followed me into the room, metallic, cold, like freshly turned soil mixed with old copper. My skin pricked. Goosebumps formed along my arms despite the radiator humming steadily. I tried to ignore it, fix the wiring, check the pipes, do my rounds, but the whispering never stopped. Always low, always behind me. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it followed. The first real confrontation happened on the 7th floor. I entered room 77 to inspect a faulty radiator. The door shut behind me. Hard. Not a slam, just closed. And the whispering stopped. Silence. Thick. Pressing against my ears. Then the lights dimmed slightly. The radiator hissed, but not like a normal release. Short, sharp bursts, almost like breaths. I turned. Nothing. But the shadows near the corners deepened. Blacker than they should have been. I called out, "Hello? Someone there?" No answer. The temperature dropped rapidly. My breath formed mist. The tools on my cart rattled gently. Nothing touched them, yet each vibrated in time with the hiss of the radiator. The next night, the activity escalated. Doors along the corridor opened and closed on their own. Taps ran briefly in vacant rooms. The lights flickered in sequences, almost like Morse code. I tried to log the patterns, but they made no sense. Random, calculated, unpredictable. At 1:30 a.m., I felt a presence behind me. Not a shadow, not reflected. A weight. A pressure against the small of my back. I spun. Empty hallway. Yet a whisper brushed my ear. Unintelligible syllables. Wet and cold. I began marking the times. Activity always peaked between 1 o'clock a.m. and 2:30 a.m. The ghost, or whatever it was, preferred those hours. Always alone, always precise. Never violent, just insistent. One night I carried a flashlight along the 5th floor. Its beam illuminated a long corridor. The shadows moved differently, not cast by the light, not mine. A figure, barely human, flickered at the far end. Just a suggestion of form, then gone. I was shaking, but continued my rounds. Couldn't leave. Someone had to maintain this hotel. In the kitchen, pans clattered, not from staff. Nobody was cooking at that hour. The sound traveled along the service corridors. I could hear footsteps pacing above me, then below, then beside. All simultaneous. Possible acoustics, yet undeniable. I tried leaving early the next morning, clocked out, got in my car. But when I returned the following night, the whispering had found me. The building itself seemed to hum. Tools moved when I wasn't looking. Shadows gathered in corners of rooms I hadn't touched. I started sleeping in the boiler room. Thick pipes muffled sound. The hum of the furnace felt safe, but the walls still whispered, breathing along with the pipes. Cold patches of air pressed against my neck. It began to appear more directly, not fully, just forms. Dark silhouettes along the stairwells. Always just at the edge of the light. Every time I approached, they retreated slowly, patiently, intentionally. I stopped speaking. The presence didn't seem to need words. Movement alone provoked it. I walked slowly, leaving doors slightly ajar, never touching objects, but it still made adjustments. Beds slightly ruffled. Radiators turned, windows cracked a centimeter. The hotel was alive, responding to my awareness. One night I felt it touch me, not a hand. Pressure, almost cold vapor. Along my shoulder, back arms, enough to make the hair on my arms stand on end. I whirled. Nothing. Only the lights flickering, in that same rhythm I had come to recognize. By the 8th night, I realized the entity could manipulate more than objects, could manipulate me. The hallway warped. My sense of direction failed. The corridor seemed longer, shorter, wider. Impossible geometry. I began keeping a journal, scribbling the oddities in detail. The final confrontation came at 2 o'clock a.m. I was in room 412, performing routine checks. The temperature dropped sharply. Shadows pressed along the walls. Whispers filled the corners of the room. Figure manifested fully, tall, indistinct, human-like, but without features. It didn't move, yet I felt it pacing me. Waiting, watching. By dawn, the presence retreated. Tools were in place. The lights normalized. The corridor looked ordinary. But the echoes remain. Now, whenever I walk the halls alone, I feel the weight of its attention. The Grand Albergo San Corrado is no longer just a building. It's alive, watching, patient. And I know, as long as I work here, I will never walk its corridors alone again. Story 5. The bellhop who carried too many bags, Trieste, Italy. I was 19 when I started working at the Grand Albergo San Corrado, just a bellhop. The uniform alone felt like a costume for a play, a deep burgundy jacket with polished brass buttons, and white gloves that I could never seem to keep clean for long. The job seemed simple enough. Carry luggage, smile politely, and then disappear. But nobody ever tells you that some hotels, they remember the weight of what you carry. Trieste in the winter has this distinct smell of salt and old stone. The Bora, this fierce wind, whips through the piazza and slams against the hotel's tall, arched windows, hitting them hard enough to make the glass tremble in its frame. Guests would often complain about the drafts. The staff, though, they complained about the 4th and 7th floors. I was new, so I learned pretty quickly not to ask why. The first truly strange thing happened with a suitcase, room 509. An elderly couple from Vienna had checked in. I carried their 2 heavy leather cases up to their room myself. They were weighty, but manageable. I placed both of them neatly on the luggage rack. As I turned to leave, one of them just slid off. It didn't tip over. It slid sideways, as if someone had nudged it from the far side. Old floors, I mumbled to the guest, trying to play it off. But I knew the rack was level. The carpet was thick. I lifted the suitcase again. This time I placed it down with extra care, making sure it was secure. It stayed put, but the moment I reached the door, it dropped again. hit the floor hard enough to split the zipper wide open. The couple stared at me, their eyes wide with accusation, as if I'd just kicked it across the room. I hadn't touched it. The room was absolutely still, no wind, no vibration from the street. Yet, I felt something behind me, a presence, feeling like someone was shifting their weight from one foot to the other. Over the next week, luggage just started behaving strangely. Handles would snap when no one was touching them. Zippers would burst open for no reason. Rolling bags, left unattended for a moment, would drift an inch or two across the carpet. It was never dramatic, always subtle. It's just enough to make me look careless, clumsy. At first, I dismissed it all as a string of bad luck, a series of odd coincidences. But then the service cart started moving on its own. I'd leave it parked in the corridor, wheels locked tight. When I'd return from delivering fresh towels to a room, it would be sitting 2 feet farther down the hall, always moving in the same direction, always toward room 412. Room 412 again, the same room the other staff avoided. I'd never asked why, but now I started noticing things. Like how cold that specific stretch of hallway always felt. A deep, penetrating chill, even in the middle of a sweltering July. The first time the poltergeist, or whatever it was, revealed itself clearly, I was carrying 3 suitcases up to the 7th floor. The elevator doors slid open. The hallway lights flickered erratically, and in that instant, the luggage in my hands grew heavier. It wasn't a gradual increase, it was immediate. It felt like someone had climbed inside each bag, adding dead weight that dragged my shoulders down. I nearly dropped them right there. The moment I stepped out of the elevator and onto the 7th floor carpet, the weight vanished. Just like that. I had to test it. The next day, I took an empty luggage cart up. No bags, nothing on it. As I pushed it past room 412, the cart jerked violently to the side. One of the front wheels lifted clean off the floor, then slammed back down. There was no incline, no obstruction on the carpet, nothing. Soon after, I started hearing things in the luggage room. It's this narrow, cramped storage space just off the lobby where guests who arrive early can leave their bags. Late at night, when the hotel was quiet and most guests were asleep, I'd sometimes go in there to organize the claim tags. That's when the thudding started. It was soft at first, like someone shifting their weight inside a large trunk. One night, a locked suitcase on one of the shelves started to tremble. It wasn't just rattling from a passing truck, it was trembling deliberately. I took a step closer. The trembling stopped. I took a step back. It started again. I leaned in, putting my ear right up against the hard shell of the case. I heard nothing, no sound from inside. And yet, the handle twitched in my peripheral vision. I blinked, and it was still again. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. That familiar metallic scent I'd come to associate with the upper floors crept into the air around me. Then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, something heavy dragging across the concrete floor. Slow, measured. When I turned, every single suitcase on the shelves had shifted forward. Not fallen, not displaced randomly, they were just closer, as if they were closing in on me. The next manifestation was violent. A businessman checked in well past midnight, in a large, expensive-looking black suitcase. I lifted it easily, but as I was halfway across the lobby, the handle snapped upward without warning, slamming into my chin. It hit me hard enough that I tasted blood. I hadn't adjusted my grip, hadn't moved my hand at all. It had moved against me. Soon the guests began to complain. "Why is my bag open? Why are all my clothes on the floor?" Housekeeping swore up and down they hadn't touched anything. Management blamed it on faulty zippers and cheap manufacturing, but I knew. I saw the pattern. Strange activity always happened after I had handled the luggage. The more bags I carried during a shift, the more incidents would occur that night. If I delivered luggage to 10 different rooms, 10 strange things would happen. It was as if the building itself resented the transfer of weight of new belongings coming inside its walls. One evening, I stayed late, reorganizing tags in the luggage room. It was just after 2 in the morning. And then it happened. Every single suitcase handle in the room snapped upright at once. A synchronized crack of metal and leather echoed in the small space. I froze. The room suddenly felt crowded. The air grew heavy, oppressive. Suitcases began to slide off their shelves. One by one, slowly, there was no visible force pushing them. It was like gravity was being manipulated, pulled sideways. They hit the floor in careful, deliberate intervals. It wasn't chaotic, it felt intentional. I backed away toward the door. It slammed shut behind me. I heard the lock click. The lights flickered violently, strobing the room in flashes of light and deep shadow. The metallic scent intensified, filling my nostrils. And the thudding began again. This time it was coming from inside every single suitcase. It wasn't the sound of scratching, not like an animal was trapped. It was pressure, dull, heavy thud, as if something heavy inside each case was shifting, trying to rise, trying to stand up. The smallest carry-on bag on the floor began to vibrate. Then it lifted, an inch off the floor. It hovered there for a split second before dropping hard. The zipper burst open. It was empty. I shouted, but the sound felt swallowed by the room, absorbed by the oppressive atmosphere. The larger trunks on the floor started to lean toward me, not falling, leaning, as if they were bowing or perhaps preparing to tip over and crush me. The pressure in the air thickened. My shoulders ached, as if invisible hands were resting on them, pressing down, down, down. It was the same dead weight I'd felt in the elevator, but this time it didn't disappear. I staggered forward, fumbling for the door. The handle twisted violently back and forth in my hand. When it finally gave way, I stumbled out into the empty, silent corridor. Behind me, the thudding ceased instantly. By morning, everything was normal. I cautiously opened the door to the luggage room. The suitcases were upright. The shelves were undisturbed. No broken zippers, no snapped handles. Management said I must have fainted from exhaustion, but my chin was bruised. My shoulders were sore for days. I still work here. I still smile at the guests and carry their bags. But now, whenever I carry luggage past room 412, I feel a strange resistance. As if someone is pulling from the opposite side. The bags always feel heavier near that door, and lighter once I pass it. It's always the same. I count the bags carefully now, because I know the building counts them too. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in the luggage room, I hear a single suitcase drag itself slowly across the floor, as if it's following me, as if it's waiting for me to carry it somewhere it wants to go. And I've begun to wonder, what happens if one night I lift a bag that doesn't belong to any guest? And what if when I lift it, I feel something inside shift and prepare to check in?